We're continuing on our reading of The Crossroads by Alexandra Diaz, and we're picking up reading at chapter 5. No one answered Tio Daniel's phone the next morning when they called back to check on Abuela. "What does that mean?" Jamie asked as he put on the long-sleeved blue polo he could use as a uniform shirt. "Probably that Tio Daniel ran out of phone on his phone credit." Tomas grabbed a coffee from the small cabinet above the kitchen sink, and inside Jamie could see a couple of dollar bills crumpled up near the bottom and heard the rattle of coins sliding from one end to the other. From the looks and sounds of it, there wasn't much money in there. Tomas's stressed expression as he shoved it back in the cupboard confirmed Jamie's suspicion. In English, they are saying, "No news is good news," which means everything is okay until we hear otherwise. I'm sure we'll get an update once Tio can add credit. "How long before that happens?" Jamie asked. It was it was Angela who answered. "Papa gets paid next week." Next week might as well have been next year. Too long to wait for an update. His parents had an email, but could only access it through the village computer, where the proprietor charged by the minute, and each page took forever to load. They might as well be on a different planet from all the information Jamie could find out, except NASA had much better reception with Mars than Jamie did with his family in Guatemala. "So more doing nothing," Jamie said. Tomas glanced back at the cabinet that held the coffee can. It was a piggy bank. "There's nothing we can do at the moment." Angela bowed her head and squeezed her eyes shut, as if wishing very hard for something. Jamie did the same. "Dear God and Maguel, please protect our family and help Abuela feel better," Jamie sighed. When he had prayed before, he felt Maguel's presence, but this time there was nothing. Like both God and Maguel didn't venture out here to the no man's land of cacti and cattle. "Pray in the truck," Tomas said as he headed to the tiny trailer bathroom. "I'll take you to the bus stop today to make sure you don't miss it. But we have to leave in 2 minutes." With Jamie's thoughts still on Abuela, they loaded into the truck and drove along the dirt road to where Mr. George's property ended and met the highway. "Your bus number is 36, Tomas reminded them as they waited in the warm truck. Yesterday's snow had melted except for a couple of spots underneath the bushes. But the morning air still held a chill colder than anything Jamie had experienced back home. Jamie turtled himself in the old hoodie Tomas had given him. They hadn't bought coats when they went shopping a few days ago. "After school, the bus will pick you up first, Jamie, then go to Angela's school." "I'm not taking the bus home today, remember? I have rehearsal," Angela reminded them. "You're sure you can get a ride home?" Tomas asked as he checked the time on his phone, a few minutes before 7 o'clock. "This one boy, Tristan, said he'll bring me back. His dad's the director." Tomas accepted that without even a comment. Back home, Tia or Abuela would have demanded to know more about this random boy, his last name, who his parents were, whether he could be trusted to be alone with Angela. Instead, Tomas turned back to his little brother. "So, Jamie, this is where you get off the bus. Look around so you recognize it." There was nothing to recognize, other than the fact that there was an open white metal gate and the dirt road that led to the homestead. There was nothing on this stretch of straight highway that made it any different than any other parts. All brown and tan with small patches of snow that were sure to be gone by the afternoon. With Jamie's luck, the driver would just drive him back to where the buses parked at night, and Jamie would have to have a slumber party on the bus all by himself. The sound of the bus's diesel engine roared through the empty highway before it appeared over a hill. Angela leapt out of the truck and waited by the edge of the road, hopping from one foot to the other. Any more excitement, and Jamie would have thought she was awaiting the arrival of a long-lost friend. "Try Tio Daniel again, will you?" Jamie asked his brother. With the time difference, it would be almost 8 o'clock in Guatemala. Tio would be at work, but he was allowed to answer the phone in an emergency. The phone rang and rang as the bus neared. Tomas shook his head and hung up when the bus stopped in front of them. I'll try again throughout the day. I'm sure Abuela is up already and telling the doctors how to set her hip properly. Yes, Abuela would tell everyone what to do, and she was always right. But Tomas hadn't seen her in 8 years. He didn't know how her arthritis kept her from working on extra damp days. Didn't know that she took naps when she thought no one was watching, and didn't remember that the nearest hospital was 45 minutes away by bus. Angela waited at the bottom of the bottom step of the bus. Tomas motioned Jamie to go. As soon as they walked on the school bus, a skinny boy with a mop-bleached hair on the top and short dark hair on the sides stood up and waved from the mob of teenagers in the back. Yo, Angela! He said her name in the English way, making the A sound as if he was about to vomit when choking on the sharp G. She smiled, waved, and in an instant, Jamie's cousin was swallowed by the mob. She peered over her shoulder only once to make sure Jamie had gotten on the bus behind her and gave him a slight wave before joining the other kids. Sit down, the driver grumbled as he waited before moving the bus. Jamie glanced around the front of the bus where the younger kids sat. Most of the seats were taken, either by a person or a backpack. One boy, about his age, with blonde hair and an infestation of freckles, glanced up from his book with a small smile, removed his bag from the seat, and went back to his book. Jamie slid beside him. Thank you. The boy ignored Jamie and turned the page in his book. What Jamie should have done was introduce himself and ask the boy his name, but the boy didn't seem to want to be disturbed. Jamie got it. He didn't like being interrupted when he was reading either, but mostly he just didn't want to try to speak English. He pulled out his sketchbook and started sketching random lines. A couple of times he turned around to look at Angela. Her group was loud, and each time he glanced their way, he caught Angela laughing along with them as if she understood everything they said. Maybe she did. With more years of school, her English had always been better than his, and her brain had a knack for it. He turned back to his drawing. Crazy lines and angles intersected in total chaos, making no sense, as each line pushed another out of the way. A self-portrait, or maybe it was a family photo. When they got to school, he remembered he didn't know the way to his classroom. The boy on the bus went to a different direction, which was disappointing since Jamie had hoped they'd be in the same class. Of course, he could ask someone for directions, except he didn't know how to ask, and he'd forgotten his teacher's name. Lots of kids passed him who looked like they might speak Spanish. At least they didn't look too different from kids who had gone to school with him back at home. But he couldn't get the words out quickly enough before they were gone. One mother kept saying, Vamos, rapido, to her young daughter, who had dug her heels into the shiny tile and refused to budge. Jamie knew better than to bother a frantic mother with a question like directions. The school wasn't that big. He could figure it out. He found his way back to the bathroom he had gotten to know all that well. It was definitely the correct bathroom. He caught a glimpse of a boy entering and unwrapping a chocolate bar. From there, he recognized the science photos outside his classroom. Maybe he should have tried harder to stay lost. Mrs. Whatever looked at him in the eye and greeted him by name and a handshake as soon as he entered. Hi, he said in English, and then rushed to the desk under the window. She did the same thing with every kid who came in. Good. It would be very weird if she only greeted him. When everyone was present, they all stood and put their hands over their hearts, like in sports with the national anthem, but instead of singing, they recited some kind of poem in bored voices. Jamie stood and put his hand on his heart along with them. Once he understood what was going on, he adapted the same bored look too and kept his mouth shut. Jamie, Mrs. said once they were seated, busted. She must have realized he hadn't recited the poem. I'd like you to, but then she went on and he didn't understand what she said next. His look of complete incomprehension must have clued her in because she changed her tactics, speaking slower and repeating her meaning with different words. After the sign out disaster the other day, maybe she figured that if you get the same response with the same answers, it's time to change the questions. Or maybe just took him for a complete dimwit. Say your name. Jamie. And what do you like to do? What do you like? Jamie understood about 60% of what she asked and hoped he was answering correctly. I like art. Art. Art, of course. He had to remember some words in English were similar to Spanish, just without the last letter. Musica, music. So would that mean the other subjects, historia, history, ciencia, mathematica? Yes, I like art. His hand into his bag. Should he show her his sketchbook, or was she asking for something else? Do you like drawing, painting, sculpture, pottery? Yes. A few kids snickered. Mrs. frowned, maybe thinking he was just saying yes without understanding the question. Well, that was pretty much true. He didn't know the specific words she used, but guessed she asked him about different kinds of art, and he did like all the ones he had tried. Instead of asking him another question he didn't know, she pointed to the girl in front of Jamie. The girl turned to look at Jamie, introduced herself, Kylie, and said something she liked that Jamie didn't understand. After Kylie, the rest of the class continued with the introductions. With 23 kids in the class, it was hard to keep track who was who, especially when some names were strange, like Wyatt and Autumn. Other kids mumbled and didn't look at Jamie when they talked. Jamie didn't know where the mumbled names stopped and what they liked started. But his ears picked up when Diego, who had a cool design shaved on the side of his black hair, said his name and said he liked Star Wars. With a name like Diego, he had to speak Spanish. And then there was Carla, who sat one row over and two desks up with long black hair and copper brown skin. She reminded him a bit of a Guatemalan native. Jamie himself was part Mayan, but her cheekbones were much more defined than his. When she pushed up her purple framed glasses and smiled at him, he almost caught his breath. I know Spanish. He bit his lip to stop an unexpected chuckle. Her Spanish was so incorrect it was funny. He wanted to correct her, but then remembered how he didn't like it when people laughed at his English. The next girl started talking before he got the chance to tell Carla that he liked cats too. Once everyone had introduced themselves, Mrs. said something that made everyone groan. They put away their books and stood up to sharpen pencils. Jamie pulled one out of his new pencil case and waited to see what would happen. Mrs. handed out papers to each row to pass down. None were left when they got to Jamie. He raised his hand. Mrs. looked for an extra copy in her hand to Jamie, and then nodded and handed him the last one. It was a test, and not just any test, a math test. He should have just kept his arm down and drawn more invisible desks and insects with his fingers. He glanced at the numbers, expecting to be totally baffled. He didn't understand what the instructions said, but the example showed converting mixed number fractions to decimals and percentages. Was that it? It seemed to be a bit rudimentary. He'd done this last year with Miguel and two of Abuela's tortillas while trying to figure out 6 fifths. Magwell, the engineer wannabe, had used his compass to determine that the tortillas were not perfectly round, not perfectly equal to one another, and therefore impossible to divide exactly into fractions or determine percentages. So he nibbled the edges to balance them out. What turned out to be impossible was nibbling two tortillas into perfect circles. Jamie worked through the problems quickly, imagining Magwell in the quest for the perfect round tortillas. When he got to the word problems, he stopped. He couldn't do it. None of the words made any sense, except 8 and 6. He knew those and figured they were part of the problem. 8, 6 were consistent with other problems. He reduced the fraction to 4/3 and didn't have to do the math to know it was 133% or 1.33. He picked out the numbers in the others, made them into fractions and percentages, and finished. He walked over to Mrs. desk with the test in hand. She had a look as if she was about to say that she couldn't help him during the test, but then replaced it with surprise when she saw he had finished. 3 minutes! She called to the class before grabbing her red pen. She ran down the problems and then turned the page to the next set. She frowned before returning to double check the first page. Jamie held his breath. Maybe he remembered these wrong. After all, Magwell was the one who was good at math, and Jamie's brain had been on tortillas during the test. Mises finished going through the test and put a check mark and then a plus sign at the top of the page before handing it back to Jamie. He had no idea what that meant. These good? He hesitated, pointing to the mark. Mises shushed him, warning the others that he had 30 seconds left, and then whispered, "The best." He walked back to his desk, his eyes fixed on the check plus, as Mises called time. Who would have ever thought he'd be good at math? If only he could tell his parents and Abuela and Magwell. At lunchtime, Jamie looked around the cafeteria for the freckled-faced boy on the bus, but he wasn't anywhere. A rustle of candy wrappers and a strong smell of chocolate made him recognize Choco Chico from the bathroom. Round face, round body, round legs, and perpetual lingering scent of chocolate. But since they had never actually met, and their only connection was the fact that they both liked to hide out in the bathroom, Jamie didn't even wave. Diego and two more boys from his class, Freddie and he forgot the other one, were playing with their Pokemon cards. Back home, Jamie had two Pokemon cards that he had found on the ground, but he had never played the game. A few times his parents had money to spare, he preferred getting art supplies or comic books. The boys said hi when Jamie sat down and then continued with their discussion. As far as Jamie could tell, they weren't playing any game, but rather were admiring one another's cards and bargaining to get the ones they wanted. When Diego noticed boy whose name Jamie couldn't remember had the card he wanted, Jamie saw his chance. "I have that card at home, Diego. I can get my parents to send it to you if you want," Jamie said in Spanish. The boys looked at him as if their bartering opportunities were now ruined. Diego's cheeks reddened. "I don't speak Spanish," he said, as if that would be the worst thing imaginable. "Sorry," Jamie said in English, though he didn't know why he was apologizing. He wasn't the one who had just lied. If Diego really hadn't understood, wouldn't he have said so? They continued talking about their cards. Diego trying to negotiate for the card he wanted, and the other boy saying he wanted two cards for his one. "Mira!" Jamie tried again to help Diego in Spanish, pointing to one of the cards the other kid wanted. "You have two of this one." "Dude, what's your problem?" Diego gathered his cards and lunch to move to the other side of his friend. "Can you believe it? Now I've got grease marks on my cards." Jamie didn't understand what Diego said, but got the general idea. He watched Diego make a fuss about wiping his card clean on his shirt, even though Jamie hadn't touched any of them. This time, he didn't even bother apologizing. He pulled out his sandwich from the Ninja Turtle bag, and secretly hoping Diego would be jealous of his coolness when his lunch bag was a boring blue. Freddie looked from Diego and his other friend to Jamie, hesitating before he spoke. Do you, have Pokemon cards, Jamie? No, Jamie shook his head. They were at home, after all. Here, he had nothing. During library time, the librarians showed him the email address that had been set up for him as he enrolled in school. He'd never had his own email address before. Coming here, he'd never had anyone to email other than Tomas, and Mama had always taken care of that. And the best thing was the librarian spoke enough Spanish to let him know that he could spend 15 minutes of the library time on the computer for free. He started a note to his parents. He knew it could be weeks before, or even months before they had enough money to splurge for a few minutes at the village's internet cafe. Still, he wasn't going to leave any form of communication untried. How is Abuela? Is she all right? I can't believe what happened to her. He kept on writing, but without accent marks and correct punctuation because he didn't know how to do them on this English keyboard. It makes me sick. I wish I could make them pay for what they've done. I feel trapped. I don't know why Tomas likes it here. There's no neighbors except the cows and horses. The people who live on the ranch with us are pretty nice, though, and it snowed yesterday, which was amazing. But it's not Guatemala, and the people are not you guys, not family. Please pray that the alphas all get struck by lightning, and it is once more safe to go home. I don't belong here. Love, Jamie. The day dragged on, and many things Jamie didn't understand, and many kids he didn't know. At one point, Mises paired him up with Samuel, who spoke Spanish fine, except Samuel had never spoken Spanish in school and didn't know the names for a lot of the stuff they were doing and got frustrated when Jamie didn't understand his English words for things like stapler. Once the final bell rang, Jamie dashed out to the bus. He sat in the same seat as this morning, except next to the window, and closed his eyes. He opened one when he felt the seat indent next to him. But the freckle-faced boy from the morning already had his book open and his nose in it. Jamie leaned against the window and went back to closed eyes. A hand tapped his shoulder. His eyes regained focus, and Jamie's bus buddy pointed out the window. What? It wasn't as if there was anything to look at or see. Not even a raven pecking at the roadkill. Then he realized the bus had stopped. And why? His stop. Thank you, he said to the boy as he gathered his things and stumbled out of the bus. The white iron gate that marked the entry to Mr. George's property stood wide open, and the barbed wire fence on either side. Jamie stepped carefully onto the cattle guard to cross into the property and then shuffled his feet down the dirt road. Judging by how long it took to drive it, Jamie guessed walking to the trailer would take a good hour. He dragged his feet more, maybe an hour and a half. Cuckoo! A strange bird call came from the west. Jamie shaded his eyes to stare at the horizon. A figure too far away to discern stood on the far ridge, one of those striped-faced antelopes that like to frolic with the cattle, or a mountain lion looking over Pride Rock. Except antelopes and lions didn't make bird calls, and he didn't see any birds. The figure sped down the ridge as if it were floating. Jamie waved, and within minutes, Don pulled his gray-spotted horse to a stop in front of him. Jamie's eyes landed on the elaborate beadwork on the horse's bridle, which matched perfectly the beaded pattern on Don's leather belt. I figured you wouldn't want to walk back to the house on your own, Don said from under the brim of his battered straw cowboy hat. Jamie let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. What a relief to hear some normal Spanish. Company would be great, Jamie said. Hop on. The old cowboy removed his left foot from the stirrup and moved his leg forward of the saddle. I've never ridden a horse before, Jamie admitted. Just the idea caused his heart to race. Better get started then. Holding the reins in his right hand, Don reached out with his left. Jamie licked his lips. How could he He could do this if he could get on a moving train with the first ladder rung higher than his head. Then a horse with a chest-high stirrup and an arm reaching out to help him should be nothing. Don held the gelding still and pulled Jamie up. The act felt clumsy, and it didn't help that horse stepped to the side when he was half on. At last, he sat on the horse's back behind the saddle. Sorry, horsey, he apologized to the horse for kicking him accidentally. He shifted a bit farther back so the edge of the saddle didn't dig into his privates. It's okay to sit here. Will it hurt the horse? Don leaned over to pat the horse's neck. This old boy's used to saddlebags weighing much more than you, kid. Just make sure you don't slide off the back end. Jamie scooted a bit closer and adjusted his backpack straps. Don might have been teasing, but he didn't make it any less possible. Hold on! Don nudged the horse before Jamie could ask to what. Within a couple of seconds, the gelding went from standing still to a gait much smoother than the coin-operated horse Jamie had rode on when he was little. The last idea that they had floated down the ridge wasn't so far-fetched now. At first, Jamie clung to Don's belt loops until one tore off, leaving Jamie with a piece of worn denim in his hand. Better hold on to the old man's waist, though he didn't want to ruin the beaded leather belt either. Maybe one day he wouldn't need to hold on at all. One day when he could ride as well as Don. Instead of riding along the road, Don took the open land. The ground under the horse's hoofs was both rocky and sandy, but the gelding didn't stumble once. One small hill, the cowboy pulled the horse to a stop and pointed with his sun-baked hand down in the valley. Two tiny coyote pups were half chewing, half playing tug of war with a stick while their mama kept surveillance nearby. With their young round faces and furry gray coats, the pups had to be the cutest things Jamie had ever seen. He itched to pull out his sketchbook from his backpack, but he wasn't entirely sure how to do that on horseback. Whether through sight or scent, the mama coyote became alerted to their presence. She gave up a faint yip, and the two pups dropped their stick game and stared at their mama with wide eyes. She gave them another signal, and before Jamie could see where they had gone, the family had turned tail and disappeared. The Navajo Indians here have a lot of stories about the coyotes and how they're tricksters, Don said. You'll never see an Indian cross a coyote's path. They think it's bad luck. They'd never turn the car around and go several miles out of their way, then drive over the place they saw the coyote cross. And with that, Don turned the horse around and let him walk down a different direction. Are the coyotes dangerous? Jamie turned back to the coyote. He couldn't see her, but he felt the mama's eyes watching him. Anything is dangerous if you aggravate it, especially when it comes to protecting its family. But in all my time working on this ranch, I've only had to kill one, and that was because it was after a weak calf I had spent all night trying to save. Jamie understood that. Family was everything, the one thing he'd die protecting. That was why it was so hard not to go after the Alphas for what they had done to Abuela and Maguel. What about other animals? Tomas said. Are there bears and mountain lions? You're not afraid they'll hurt or kill you. The old rancher didn't take a second to think about it. When it's my time to go, it won't be a bear or a mountain lion. I'll just leave, right off into the sunset and disappear. No mess, no fuss, just my time. Just like Luke Skywalker. Who? He's never mind. Jamie knew Don didn't watch TV or movies. Not when he said that being out in nature was more entertaining. Jamie supposed when you were older than Jesus, you'd lived most of your life before the invention of television anyway. Jamie paused to think of a tactful way to ask what he wanted to know. You're not planning on riding into the sunset any time soon, are you? A grunt came out of Don. Don't get me wrong, I love your brother like my own, but he doesn't understand the cattle like I do. Not many do. Don's meaning couldn't have been clearer. Tomas worked hard, but at the end of the day, cattle ranching was just a job. It wasn't his passion. Not like it was for Don. Not like an art was for him. Do you have kids, Don? Yeah, thousands. Jamie stared at the lean back in front of him and then grinned. I meant kids that don't have four legs. Not officially. The cowboy shifted his hat to reveal a couple of wispy silver hairs from the nape of his neck. Chi and I tried, but it wasn't meant to be. Instead, I had Mr. George riding with me before he could walk. I remember his two sisters being born. When he grew up and brought home a wife, he made me godfather to their first daughter. His whole family are my kids, and quite a lot of people in the community as well. Mexicans, gringos, Indians. Family knows no race, and they're all my kids. A part of me. Tomas, too. And me and Angela. The words escaped before Jamie could stop them. He couldn't have said that. They'd only known the man for a week and a half. Don would think him disrespectful. The old rancher twisted in the saddle with more flexibility than Jamie thought possible for anyone of any age. His dark eyes deeply set in his leathery face and half hidden by the hat brim. He stared long and hard at Jamie. I only take my kids out on rides.